Namaum Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachani Nirvisesa Sanjivadi Paspita Desatani. His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj Ki Jai. So, of course, I first met Maharaj in probably 1977 right here, Krishna Balaram Mandir. At the time I was temple president in Hawaii, and I came the end of August and I stayed for 2 weeks, which Srila Prabhupada was here, and I was helping Upendra Prabhu, who was his personal servant, one of his personal servants at the time, and Bhakti Charu Maharaj was here at that time. So that was my first meeting. Of course, I was very touched by who he was. He was, I'm sure, as you're going to hear again and again as people talk, he was such a gentleman, such a gentle soul, and very humble. He had so many qualities that I appreciated in Srila Prabhupada. Anyway, he was very kind to me, and he had no problem in having me help him engage in service and different things and cooking, like that. And then, of course, Prabhupada left shortly after that. I went back to Hawaii. And just to give some background, I was in Hawaii till 1980, then I was in Los Angeles till like 1983. And then by 1984, I had a wife and 3 children, so I wound up moving back to my home area. Had to get a place to rent, had to get a job. So it was at that time when I was outside of the protection of ISKCON, more or less. I was an hour away from any temple. And of course, that lifestyle, having a full-time job, going every day, not being near a temple, you find yourself gradually drying up. And the internet was, of course, just starting to boom by the late 80s, into the 90s. We were all on what was called AOL, America Online. And being on the internet, somehow or other I came across the fact that Prabhupada's centennial was coming in 1996. So it was 1995, and Bhakti Charu Maharaj, he was trying to organize a program to bring all of the, we say like the disconnected devotees back. You know, all these, my godbrothers, my godsisters, and others who had found themselves in similar situations to me for one reason or another. And he started this program for the centennial that he wanted to somehow reach out to all of his godbrothers, his godsisters, to see that they would be more involved in their devotional service, feel closer to Prabhupada's society, feel closer to Srila Prabhupada. And I don't know about anybody else, but myself, I took it as an opportunity. I was, like I say, for a dozen years, I was pretty distant from the society, just going to the temple on special festival days and things like that. So it was kind of by his influence, by his pushing from afar, that I wound up coming to Vrindavan for 1996. And after over a dozen years of not coming to India, not being very involved in the society, that was the first step where I, again, got into more involved in Krishna consciousness. And more than that, it's when I began my writings, which about took 7 years, but later became a book. So that influence was very, very essential, was very important. And it had an effect on me, just getting a taste again. So that was definitely an influence of Bhakti Charu Maharaj. And then, of course, after that, I was coming back to Vrindavan. I remember I was here 2000, 2001. Radhanath Swami involved me in one of his programs here during Kartik. We went to Ravel. I remember it was the first day of his pilgrimage. They had, like, at that time, 2001, 20 years ago, they had over a dozen buses all filled with the devotees. He had me speak the first day. So again, just that little bit of taste, it helps so much. And it's something that Maharaj, Bhakti Charu Maharaj, understood very well. So then we'll fast forward into 2010, between 2010 and 2020, I started probably a half a dozen times. I would go to Atlanta Temple, which they would have the Panihati Festival, which Jayapataka Maharaj made famous in different places, particularly Atlanta, where he would go to every year at that time. So because I was in the US and temple president, he would invite me to come and speak 1 or 2 days about Srila Prabhupada. So just in the last few years, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, again, seeking Mahiti, he was inviting me to come to Atlanta. And one of the other persons, the big name they would invite, was Bhakti Charu Maharaj, because now this time, Jayapataka Maharaj, he wasn't traveling as much. Huh? So since that community has a large Bengali community, so they would invite Bhakti Charu Maharaj. And so I was there for, not the last Panihati, but the 2 before that. I was there for Panihati Festival. And 2 years ago, I was there for the Janmashtami Festival. And Bhakti Charu Maharaj was there at both of those festivals. And we stayed next door to the temple in the guest house, and I was literally right next to him. We would take prasadam together downstairs. Him and whatever Prabhupada disciples were there, we would all have breakfast and lunch together. So it was a very nice atmosphere. And him and I, we always got along very well. I would imagine he got along with everyone very nicely. But we definitely, in some ways, we would speak the same language. He would talk about Srila Prabhupada so much. And in the classes, he would talk about Prabhupada. Then I would get up and talk about Prabhupada, tell different pastimes and things. And I remember each time after the class, he would come up to me and he said the exact same thing each time. He'd say, "That was amazing." He said, "That was wonderful." He said, "This class," he said, "is so nice." So in that way, it was very encouraging. But he was also, just to hear about Prabhupada, he would become so inspired wherever it was coming from. We know his book has become one of the very sought-after books, how he talks about his own feelings, his emotions, and his service to Srila Prabhupada. And so as I mentioned, 1996, he kind of brought me in. And it started a very wonderful thing where more and more I became engaged in service. So one day as we were waiting for lunch to be served, and he was sitting at the head of the table, Panchagoda Prabhu was there, Teja Prakash was there, I was there, one other devotee, all his godbrothers were there. And while we were waiting to be served, he said, "I have an idea." And it just coming for now, this 125th anniversary, he realized it was coming, Prabhupada's anniversary of his appearance 125 years ago. And he said, what I want to do, he said, is in the US, because now he was going to the US. He had that place in Florida, a farm-like community outside Orlando. And he said, I want to have a program, he said, for my godbrothers and godsisters. He said, I want them all to come. He said, I want everybody to be invited. He said, we have to figure out where to do it. He said, we can all get together for a week or so. And again, give everybody the opportunity just to engage in service. And and somehow reconnect. He said, wherever they are, whatever they're doing, however long they may be away, he said, let's get them here. He said, it will pay all the expenses. He said, it's going to cost a few $100,000. He said, we'll have to get a nice retreat area, pay for everybody's flight, pay for their rooms, pay for the prasadam, everything. He said, he said, I'll seed it. He said, I'll start it with $100,000. He said, towards this program. So he said, let's all keep in touch. He said, and we should get this going. So this is what I saw again and again with Bhakti Charu Maharaj, is his appreciation, his desire to see that all of Prabhupada's followers, particularly his godbrothers and godsisters, that somehow or other we appreciate them, give them the opportunity to do some service, whatever the situation was. And again, what I always saw was this was the way Prabhupada was. I was with Srila Prabhupada for more than 2 years. It's all Prabhupada ever saw in any of us was the service we were doing. If he saw there were difficulties, of course he would correct it. Like in the class, not the other day, but a week or so ago, I was saying, Prabhupada called me into his room during that time 12 times, saying, where is everyone? Where are the others? And they'd be taking rest. So it wasn't that Prabhupada never corrected or never chastised, but whenever he saw that anyone was starting to drift away, he would bring them back in. So this is the quality. This is a Vaishnava. And this is what I saw with Maharaj, is he had that same, didn't see any faults in others. He just saw, these are Prabhupads. These are Prabhupada's people. They're my brothers, my sisters. And he would want to engage them in service. So somehow or other, as we all do, just like Prabhupada, back in 1977, he left us, but of course never left, as he said, the devotee, he never dies, he lives in his instructions. So Prabhupada gave us so many instructions, and I could see that Maharaj, he took to Prabhupada's instructions very, very sincerely, very purely. And as I appreciated, of course, he had the same, like Prabhupada, he was an aristocratic man, Maharaj. He came from a very nice family, and he had those wonderful qualities. He was very compassionate. He spoke very nicely, and you would have this natural attraction towards such a person as a great Vaishnava. His going, of course, is as any devotee when they leave, any very wonderful devotee, it's always very difficult. But they leave behind their legacy, and they leave behind their example. So that example of Maharaj for me is something that is very important, very enlivening, encouraging, and just on a personal level, he inspired me so much by his desire to always serve the devotees. Not that we just take service. This isn't our thing, accepting service. Prabhupada said you have to give back. There's something, of course, I always saw with Prabhupada. Not that we're eager that people service, but we want to give service to others. So he exemplified that very much in everything he did. And over the years, he became more and more dynamic, I think, within our ISKCON society, which makes it all the more difficult for all of us. At the same time, his compassion is there, his blessings are there, the example is there, particularly for his own disciples, of what to aspire for. So this is what a Vaishnava does. They show you everything. They show you the way. They show you all the intricacies, how to develop Krishna consciousness. And they set the example. As I said, Prabhupada, I was just reading yesterday, Prabhupada was saying, the only thing I've introduced, he said, was translating books. He says that's the one thing. Everything else, he said, I learned as a child. He said, everything I'm showing you, all the examples, everything I'm doing, he said, everything in our society, he said, I was doing from childhood. He said, as my father was training me up. Perfect Vaishnava. And as I always say, whatever level one is on, Srila Prabhupada was the most intimate servant of the Lord, and Srimati Radharani. But if you went into his room any time of the day, you would see him practicing Krishna consciousness as he showed us. You would see him chanting his rounds, giving classes, reading his books. Prabhupada was doing this daily, reading, which every time I would go in the room, it took me a long time when I first became his servant to see him reading his books, and I would wonder, he's reading these books. But as he told me more than once, he said, he would be amazed, he said, when I read what is there. He said, I think how? He said, how did I do it? Then, of course, he said, I didn't. He said, it's coming from Krishna. It's Krishna. So he would read in that way, with that ultimate humility. Everything he did was only by the mercy of Guru and Krishna. Sometimes I would go into Prabhupada's room after class in the morning, or after breakfast he would call me in, because particularly outside of the US, I would record the classes, because there wouldn't be in 1972, 1973, there wasn't a lot of, there weren't any videos going on, and even audio recordings in India and other places didn't always happen. Mayapur, I remember one day in Mayapur, he called me in his room and offered obeisances. He looked at me, he said, did you record class today? I said, yes, Prabhupada. He said, bring it. He said, I want to hear it. He said, it was a very nice class. But he would say it in such a way that you could see it was coming from Krishna. Not that he was bragging about what he did, but he himself was inspired by hearing what he had said. So this is devotee. And again, this was, I saw these things with Bhakti Charu Maharaj, like he could say everything he was doing, and then to sit at a class that I had given and afterwards say, that was just wonderful. He would become so inspired to hear from others. So this is very important to understand. That devotee, he sees everyone's doing so much service. Me, I'm just struggling a little bit to try to make some progress, some advancement in Krishna consciousness. But he sees everyone else doing such nice service. And that is the most encouraging thing. My only regret is, well, of course he's gone, that's a big regret. But the idea he had, which was a very wonderful idea to, again, in the US, bring all these devotees back together again. Because that's all it takes. As Prabhupada knew. If someone is struggling in any way, or has distanced themselves from associating with devotees, which as we know is most important activity, Prabhupada would say, is associate with devotees. Not that we just by ourselves. He wanted to inspire that again, to see. And even if 1, 2 people, just like for me, he inspired me back in the 90s to take part, to get more involved. And then once you do that, it just becomes addictive. Devotional service is addictive. So, very much appreciate Maharaj. I'm very happy to be able to say a little something. There's not enough I can say about him. Again, I see so much the qualities he had, which were topmost Vaishnava qualities. So all glories to His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj. Hare Krishna.